هوية بريس نحو إعلام هادف.
So thanks for joining, and thanks again all the audience to be here. So I just want first still, Mr. Halal, can you please introduce yourself, because maybe not a lot of people may know you.
Thank you very much, Ismail. Thank you very much for the African Business Nuclear platform for the invitation and the organizers. I'm Mohamed Talal Lahlou. So after my PhD in Islamic finance and Islamic capital markets, I specialized in Islamic finance consulting and Islamic finance structuring also for investment structures. So getting finance and how to invest these funds.
Thank you for your introduction. So let's maybe jump directly maybe to the topic. So we know that Africa is needing a lot of growing energy demands for infrastructure needs, but also for education, for infrastructure, for industry as well, to develop this industry. So the energy demand is growing and growing. So for such kind of topic, why is ethical financing so important in this context?
Yes, so as we saw in the morning in the interventions from several countries, the needs in energy in Africa are high. One of the factors is demography. Africa is the fastest growing continent in terms of demographics. So there is a need in energy, and there will be a need while other countries have a declining population. In Africa is fast growing. So there is a high need in many sectors, but the problem is it has to be sustainable. And we have a big problem in Africa. It's debt. We have big debt. We have countries that are appealing to debt instruments. And here I quote, or I remember one of the famous quotes of the previous president of Nigeria, Obasanjo. He said, we borrowed 5 billions and we gave back something like 80 billions, and we're still giving back. So this reminds us also of the student debt bubble in the United States. Students who borrow $10,000, they are giving back 20,000, 30,000. Why? Because every time you have an issue in the country for giving back the money, you have more interest. So how can we find the sustainable financing that will be more equitable? Islamic finance is something that provides us with tools that are based on more equity, equality, etc. So it's more sustainable, and Africa needs something that is sustainable.
Yeah, indeed. I think this, especially as you mentioned, the debt is something quite demanding, and that's maybe a tool that we need to find in order to avoid maybe having such kind of debt, in order to develop the infrastructure program and project in Africa. So can you maybe explain us some key principle of the Islamic finance?
Yes. So here we will talk about some of the key pillars of Islamic finance, and why, I mean, what's the link between Islamic finance and nuclear power? So we have a kind of pioneering effect, and here we have representatives of South Africa who were pioneering in nuclear energy in the African continent, and I will also want to congratulate them for being pioneers in raising the case of Palestine in the ICJ. This is something that has to be, they have to be congratulated on. And we need to know what is Islamic finance. Islamic finance is about something that is more just, which means the first main thing to know in Islamic finance is that we don't work with interest. So in case you have a problem in the repayment, we don't charge interest. There is no more late penalty. So some people may ask, well, if someone wants to not repay, there are solutions, like the mortgage, like the guarantee, etc., etc. So there are solutions. So there are 5 main pillars to know in Islamic finance. The first one is the prohibition of interest. And this is something that Islamic finance has been famous about, because it's grounded also in Judaism and Christianity, but Islam has been stressing more about it, especially that last century, while in the other countries, interest-based transactions became something normal. So the first thing is prohibition of interest. The second thing is a kind of symmetry to the prohibition of interest. It's risk sharing. What do we mean by risk sharing? It means we need more justice in this finance. We don't need the class of people or institutions that always win, which means if I finance a project of yours, for instance, and you launch a startup or a project or a nuclear platform, and it's private. If you're successful, we will get our debt back plus interest. But if you fail, what's happening? We still get our debt back plus interest. This is not just. In Islamic finance, the core idea is that if the project is successful, we share the profits. If the project fails, we share the risk. And this means that the crisis, from a macroeconomic level, the crises, when they happen, they are less damaging. They are more natural and less damaging. This is the second thing. The third thing is that it's asset-backed. So in Islamic finance, you can't set up purely financial tools like derivatives, options, CDO cubes, CDO square, etc., etc. This is not possible. So it's asset-backed, which means if you want to set up a transaction, it has to be grounded on the economic activity. Something has to move in the economy. And the fourth thing, it has to be halal or lawful, which means you can't transact in something linked to a casino, for instance, or a pork or something like unlawful or unethical industries. They can't be financed. And the fifth thing is the prohibition of uncertainty and gambling, which means in a contract in Islamic finance, when you set up a contract, it has to be transparent. But there is no small things written made to not to be read. Everything has to be transparent. It has to be straightforward, simple, accessible, and equitable for both parties. Yeah.
Thanks very much for your explanation. Maybe if we jump to these five elements or the 5 conditions for maybe a transaction or even a financial transaction to respect the ethical or Sharia compliance, as we mentioned, tools. If we make the link now with nuclear, so nuclear is a project which is a long-term project, which means and needs a lot of assets from the beginning. So we speak about $10 billion of dollars for 1 unit. It's something that can be risky because, as we mentioned, a lot of people or even institutions are a little bit don't want to maybe take such kind of risk for such kind of long-term project. They maybe not be sure that they will recover the money maybe after years of development. So related to this specific activity of nuclear, if you see it on a financial or Islamic financial lens, how this kind of project can be filled and meet the Sharia compliant, criteria.
Yeah, and Islamic finance offers many tools for financing. It can be debt-based, but without interest. It can be equity-based. It can be hybrid. It can be commercial. It can be entrepreneurial. So we have many solutions for financing. For instance, we have the salam finance, which means selling commodity before having it with some conditions, of course, because you can't sell something you don't own. But with some conditions, we have the salam financing that gives you some cash before even starting the production. This can be implemented for electricity, for instance. You can sell electricity, and we know that in some 360-degree financing and programs, they bring the facility and they bring the finance. In these contracts, sometimes they ask for guaranteeing buying some quantity of gigawatts or megawatts of electricity with a certain price. This can be implemented with the salam financing. We also have the musharaka financing, which is a kind of equity finance. This means the government can be a shareholder in the plant, and the citizens can be also shareholders in the plant. And the third party, which is the builder of the plant, also can be a shareholder in the plant. So we can have many shareholders Of course, with the musharaka, you have a power you can exercise in the General Assembly your voting rights. But we have another structure, which is sukuk. And sukuk is very famous all over the world, that can allow you to raise money without necessarily giving back some voting power. So we also have the sukuk, and we will talk again about the sukuk, of course. And we have so we said we have the salam, we have the musharaka, we have the mudaraba, which means one party brings the capital, another party brings the knowledge and the know-how. And we have other tools for financing. We have the waqf, which is, in this aspect, it's non-lucrative, which is not for profit. It's not for profit. So this can be something funded by the state and the citizens, or international organizations. We have the istisna, which is a tool that can help you build the facility and getting funding for it. So we have many solutions for financing, provided the customer, which is the state, knows what's the objective and has this priority of decreasing the state debt.
Thank you. And indeed, when you speak about the several mechanisms inside the Islamic finance, we heard a lot related to international development now, but much more focused on renewables. When we speak about green sukuk, and we hear that in Malaysia, but in some of those countries. So how this green sukuk maybe can be, as we said, an example or a base for the development of nuclear projects or nuclear development.
Yes, green sukuk have been very famous these last years. Generally, there are financing structures that help you raise funds, but these funds have to go to specific projects, which means they have to finance projects and investments that are sustainable and that have a green orientation, that meet some criteria of ESG, socially responsible investments, SRIs, and you know there are SRIs funds in many finance institutions. So all these aspects, they match also another aspect of Islamic finance, which is justice and sustainability, because when you finance green initiatives, this means you are guaranteeing to future generations, a cleaner environment and also a cleaner planet. You're leaving something better than what you found.
And related to that, so now, as we said, we need some fund and finance in order to finance the nuclear project. Some institution, and maybe famous institution, we heard about the Islamic Development Bank that usually, and we heard, participate in development of some countries for some infrastructure project. It can be trained. We heard about some renewables projects. So how this Islamic Development Bank, how do you feel that they can be or interested in funding nuclear projects, or can be maybe the rules that they expect in order to be able to fund or finance such kind of project, according to you?
Yes, Islamic Development Bank is transnational cross-border institution that finances the government-linked projects. Generally, they also sometimes get involved in big private projects or syndicate financing project, but generally they finance government-based projects. So they have been involved in hydroelectric infrastructure financing, in sustainable energy financing. So they have a long track record of infrastructure and energy financing. These institutions, they not only can they bring their know-how in terms of finance, but they also can bring a knowledge in terms of technicalities, in terms of benchmarks with other countries. For instance, we have a benchmark in South Africa. We have a benchmark now that is coming from Egypt. We have other benchmarks in other fields in energy from other African and Asian countries. As you know, it does not finance only African projects. So there are many things that these transnational institutions that are based on Islamic finance can bring. And also, we can mention the fact that it's not necessary that these investments and these projects be financed only by institutions. They can be financed by citizens.
And indeed, yeah. I think you make now the link between something that I wanted to ask. we saw several, even in nuclear projects, some citizen initiatives in some country or even industry initiative in some countries. In Finland, for example, we saw a model that was named Mankala, where a lot of industry came together and gathered together, and they put the money on the table to finance the project in order to be sure that they will have electricity with a certain price and guarantee this price to develop their industry. And in Belgium, I don't know if maybe some of you heard, but in Belgium as well, there is a citizen, I would say, initiatives. That's when they heard about the government wants to stop the nuclear power plant in Belgium. They say, okay, why not investing by ourselves in the nuclear power plant in order to keep them operating, even if the government doesn't want, but to make pressure on them and to say we are ready to finance such kind of nuclear project and to extend the life of those projects. So how do you see this population and even sometimes industry initiative to finance nuclear projects for specific needs? And especially when you spoke the needs, I think one example was the electricity price in Europe after the war between Ukraine and Russia, when the price, I think, they rise in a very, very high rates. And a lot of especially the European population, were claiming we don't want such kind of electricity rising. We want a solution that will be, cheap for us and not be with uncertainties in the future.
Exactly. So here there is an ethical aspect. You know, nowadays finance gets more and more disintermediated, which means you don't need to go to a bank to set up a saving account. Then the bank looks for an investment. Then the bank studies the investment. Then the bank invests, and then all these profits are shared in the value chain. Now, especially with the blockchain, you can track. You can track live your investments without a risk of corrupting the chain. So nowadays you can leverage on the blockchain. You can leverage on the citizen financing to get cheaper financing. How is this? In many countries, you have a lot of citizens who have, let's say, savings that are between $0 and $20,000. This is the savings of many people in many countries, and you have a large fraction of the middle class having such savings, which means they don't have enough funds to get into real estate or these kind of investments. So often they just keep their savings either in a current account or a saving account with interest. This means many frictions, financial frictions. It's not profitable. You get 1%, you get 2%, you get 3%. Put aside the aspect that it's not permitted in Islam, but still it's not efficient. And then the banks also have a lot of expenses in finding a good project, something that is not very risky because they can't risk the funds, because in the liabilities it's something guaranteed. The funds of the people are guaranteed by the bank, although it's guaranteed only at the level of 100,000 euros in Europe, for instance. But still, it's a debt. So by bridging between the citizens and the nuclear project, for instance, you get a solution that can be fractioned via sukuk, for instance. You raise funds. Each citizen can put something like 1,000 euros, 10,000 euros, 20,000 euros, and be a shareholder in the plant. Now you may tell me, the government does not want the control over this plant to be given to unknown people. So here you can use the sukuk instrument, which means they can be shareholders without voting rights. At the beginning, you get an agreement on this, and then you raise the funds. So the government has the control, and then at the end of the day, the government is a representative of the population. So it's just an arrangement. And so you bridge, you get cheaper financing, and you answer a problem for these middle-class people that did not have, let's say, examples or ways to invest their money. So they get money, you get cheaper financing, and you still keep control because it's people from your own country who own it, not someone coming from 20,000 kilometers with its expertise, with its employees, with its capital, who is controlling your power plant. Yeah.
Thank you for your explanation. And if we go now maybe to the, I would say, classical financing. So usually in classical financing, we have, what you said, usually the 30% of equity that usually is coming funding from the developer itself to reach a certain decision-making milestone. And usually it comes after the siting, when we develop the site activities and the site characterization. And after that, they develop the project on their own funds. And after that, they reduce the risk on the project. They got the construction license, and then they are able to ask for additional, self-funding. And usually they go to debt, and they use the 30% equity and 70% of debt. How can Islamic finance maybe play a role or maybe influence this usual, I would say, mechanism?
Yeah, we can understand that sometimes debt is necessary in some projects, and debt does not mean interest. So we can have a sukuk based on debt, which is selling on installments, for instance. So you get a nuclear plant, and then you get a sukuk financed by investment funds or private bodies that is going to buy the material to build the power plant, and then this sukuk will take the asset in the assets of the SPV, special purpose vehicle, that is supervising the sukuk or owning the sukuk, and then these will sell the material to the agency of the government that is going to build the power plant. They will pay via installments. Of course, you will ask me, what's the SPV gaining in it, representing the investors? Well, the SPV is gaining a markup. It's profitable, which means they will buy at a certain price the material and then sell it with a markup. And the SPV holders or owners, which mean the sukuk holders, will get their revenues like every month or every year, etc., etc. So there are ways to get debt financing also for the 70% without interest. And also these 70%, they can also be based on the qard hasan, which means non-interest based debt that can come from the citizens to the government. We've seen this. I mean, we have representatives of South Korea this morning. In the beginning of the century, South Korea needed a lot of money. Many citizens gave to the government money. They gave their jewelry, etc., savings, etc. So the citizens, if they have confidence that the state is going to spend well these funds, they are ready sometimes either to finance via equity or to finance via interest-free debt, or to finance via, like we said, mechanisms of markup, which means paying via installments through a sukuk that is based on payment by installments plus a profit.
And especially on that point, I think we speak in the beginning that the population of Africa is growing. So it means that also at the same time we have maybe more and more middle-class people. So how do you see then and we can see maybe the benefit of having more and more people in Africa that want also to develop their infrastructure, and maybe more and more maybe middle-class people that maybe have more savings. So how to use maybe those people, or maybe push them and convince them to maybe invest their money or their savings in nuclear projects. How do you see that?
Well, we're not use the people, we use their savings.
Indeed.
Yeah. The savings, yeah, they have to be oriented to the productive economy. And it's preferably in the sustainable economy and sustainable projects. So if you find via either sukuk or Islamic investment funds that already exist, there are dozens of them all around the world, that will set up a financing structure that will raise these funds to finance these power plants, then you will bridge this, and you can track this with the blockchain, you can track this with all the digital tools available nowadays, so that the citizen can be a shareholder in the power plant and see how many megawatts it's selling every year, and then looking at its revenue depending on its share. So it can be a strong commitment from the state to the citizens, and also from the citizens to the state via financing. Yeah.
So related to maybe, we speak about maybe some countries that are more advanced in the Islamic finance, and we speak about Malaysia, Indonesia, maybe some other Middle Eastern country. So how do you see this, as usually they say, South-South cooperation, in order that this country can be beneficial and help the African countries in development of the infrastructure and at the same time for nuclear projects?
I think there are many synergies in the South-South cooperation. First, because the culture is closer, the principles are closer, and also the fact that, for instance, you gave the example of Malaysia. Malaysia is pioneer in sukuk emission. It may represent something like 30 to 40% of the sukuk emission of all the world. Malaysia is only 30 million in the population, but still it represents something like 30% or 40% of the sukuk emission all over the world. I shall remind you that sukuk, since they started, now they crossed $1 trillion cumulative finance. So it's a huge figure. They represent something that is increasing. We have growth, a two-digit growth. So they can, these countries, they can bring the know-how, they can bring financing, they can bring experiences for sukuk, for instance, in financing energy, green energy, sustainable projects, etc. Morocco, for instance, has a strong experience in alternative energies, sustainable energies, also that it can help many countries benefiting from it. So I see many synergies in these kind of cooperations, the South-South cooperation.
Thank you. And maybe my last question, or one of my last questions would be, if you were an advisor to maybe a minister in Africa, what would be your top recommendation on how to implement the Islamic finance that will work in order to make nuclear development working and meeting the targets?
My advice would be, forget about interest-based debt. It's generating so many inequalities. The world is getting more and more unequal, more and more crisis. So forget about interest-based financing. Forget about debt with interest. You can finance all these projects without interest in a more just way, more ethical way, and a more sustainable way via these structures we mentioned, like the sukuk. So you can do it without interest-based debt.
Thank you very much. And maybe to wrap up, so what gives you hope related to Africa future developing a clean energy?
I think the fact that the next decades will be made by Africa, because Africa is the fastest growing now country, and the population is young. So we have a lot of hope that the next decades, maybe you will see Africa pioneering before the end of the century, inshallah.
Thank you very much, inshallah. Thank you very much. It was my last question.
هوية بريس نحو إعلام هادف.